Perfect. I think we have enough people to get things kicked off here. So really appreciate everyone taking time out of their Friday to join us here. Just want to give a quick background on Foundation. I know everyone probably has a little bit of background, but always like to give some more context here. As you all know, I'm Dorian, Director of Portfolio Operations here. So worked with all of you fine folks at one time or another. And more background on Foundation. We're an early stage venture capital firm. And since we've been founded in 1995, we've made over 200 investments that have resulted in 36 IPOs, over 80 acquisitions. And some notable portfolio companies include Netflix, Mobile Iron, Forge Rock, Jasper, Cohesity, and Chegg. But more importantly, I want to introduce the folks who will be the stars of the show today. From our investment team, the host will actually be Sid Trivedi, who's been with Foundation for 12 years now. He's a partner at the firm, focused in investing in cybersecurity and IT infrastructure software. Joined in 2018, as I mentioned, and has really been advising the cyber and IT companies specifically for those last 12 years. Most importantly, our guest of the day, and who I'm really looking forward to you all hearing from, is Ric Smith, who's the Chief Product and Technology Officer at SentinelOne. Prior to his current role, Ric was SVP of Engineering at Medallia, and prior to this, he's held senior engineering leadership positions at Oracle, started his career at Lockheed Martin, and a little bit of background on SentinelOne. It's one of the leading endpoint detection and response platforms with $760 million in ARR, over 11,000 customers, over 2,000 employees, and a market cap of over $5 billion. So this should be a very interesting conversation for everyone today. And before I kick it over to Sid to get us started here, just want to reiterate to everyone to please submit all questions you have to the chat so we don't have to worry about anyone coming off mute and sort of interrupting the conversation there. So feel free to submit all of those questions and we'll try to weave them into the conversation there. But without further ado, Sid, I'll kick it over to you and get you on the spotlight there.
Thank you, Dorian. And only one edit on Dorian's statement. I've been at the firm, this is my 7th year at the firm, not 12 years, but I have been covering cyber and IT for 12 years. So, not yet at that point, but hopefully, in the future. Ric, so good to see you.
Likewise. Always a pleasure and nice to meet everybody here.
Let's start a little bit, we'll talk about SentinelOne, we'll talk about Medallia, but before we do that, let's go to the early years of your engineering career at Oracle. And you spent 11 years at Oracle and you worked with some pretty well-known leaders. Thomas Kurian was there, Mike Otteson was there. How did these leaders interact in those early years for you, and what did you learn from them about effective leadership skills?
Sure. So I started my career pretty much at Oracle. I did a short stint at Lockheed Martin before wandering over there. And I ended up initially at Oracle, basically working with the NSA to try to fit Oracle's products in. And I had some strong opinions about Oracle products, which eventually led me to be asked to move from Fort Meade, Maryland to headquarters to become the product manager for a lot of the development tools that they had at Oracle at the time. And that put me at about 23 years old at a corner desk right outside of Thomas Kurian's office, and instantly started having regular meetings with him, obviously in a bigger purview, because every meeting with Thomas has quite a court around him to make decisions. But I got a front row seat to how he built the middleware business, how he ultimately changed the applications business, and then ultimately started building out Oracle Data Cloud, and then eventually the Oracle Cloud in and of itself, before he parted ways and went over to Google. He has a tenacity of being able to really blend a strong technical understanding with strong business acumen, which I admired immensely. And that's something that, and I realize it's a long-winded way of answering your question, but ultimately that became the critical thing in terms of how I developed my own career. So as an engineer, went product management, went to business school, have always straddled those 3 areas dominantly throughout my career, even if I've just been in a general engineering capacity. Now with my role at SentinelOne, I obviously have product management, UX, engineering, IT, and security all under my purview, further, emphasizing that that lens of thinking. And I think that it's really important to maintain that, or at least have a point of view on it, because it makes you a better engineer, even if that's the focus that you've got, because you know exactly what the organization needs and what your customer needs, and can interpret that into financial outcomes for the business. And that's a very important thing for you to be able to do across the board, even at the early stages of your career.
And you had these 11 years at Oracle, and then you make this very tough decision, and you leave Oracle, which at the time and is still one of the world's largest enterprise software companies, and you joined Medallia. And Medallia at the time was a private growth stage startup. It hadn't yet gone public, and it had just become a unicorn. And at the time, it had raised about $250 million. What influenced the decision to go from this massive public company to a private high growth tech startup?
A couple of things. At Oracle, we'd started doing a lot of acquisitions. Two of those included Eloqua and BlueKai. I started to get pretty intimate with those teams. I started running portions of those teams, if not the teams themselves. And I realized I was missing out on something, even though I kind of had my pick of projects at Oracle. And at that time, Oracle had also sent me to business school to get my MBA from Wharton. And it was kind of the marriage of those things that made me understand I needed a broader diversity of thinking. I wanted to have more impact. I felt like I had pretty good impact, but I mean, Oracle's a behemoth. There's only so much, guy in his, at this point, early 30s can do to really put a dent in the company. So I really wanted that kind of impact. So I developed a short list of companies that were pre-IPO that I wanted to go and potentially venture into. I talked with companies like MuleSoft, Atlassian at the time, got opportunities at all of them. Not quite the role that I was looking for, but Medallia ultimately resonated with me. I liked the problem that they were solving. I liked their investment thesis at the time. Obviously, that's proved out differently in the market based on where customer experience management went as a market opportunity as a whole. But it was really those things that made me consider the option. And it was good. I met a whole different group of people, a whole different customer base, saw a whole different lens of how to develop a business. And I think that set me up well to be successful at SentinelOne ultimately.
And I think how did you change your behavior to become more startup oriented as an executive when you made this switch? Was it innate? Was it almost immediate, or did you have to do something to get comfortable?
I think I got to cheat on that, because the team that I was with dominantly at Oracle, we were mandated to actually operate in that kind of fashion. So we were supposed to be the fast movers that moved outside the methodical pace of a lot of the development teams, because our job on behalf of Thomas was to go solve product related problems that the R&D teams just could not attack and react to the market and with the veracity and intensity that Thomas wanted at the time. So transitioning into startup land, I think I actually got asked to slow down a couple times at Medallia, to be honest.
So it's the opposite, basically. It was, hey, Rick, slow down a little bit.
Yeah, but it was a great experience. I mean, there the goalpost was, how do you take a company that was dominantly focused on a cohort of 800 customers, really centered around the Fortune 1000, and enable the product to actually move down market, which is no easy feat, but a lot of fun, and it was a great opportunity.
So up to this point, you spent 5 years at Medallia, and up to that point, you had spent most of your time in areas across data, marketing, analytics, and cloud. And this was both at Oracle as well as at Medallia. After those 5 years, you made this decision to change sectors. And you decided to go into cybersecurity and become SentinelOne's CTO. How did you make that call to switch into cyber?
Well, going back to the notion of having a level of business acumen, I was looking for a market that obviously is high growth, very interesting, both from a product perspective and a technology perspective. Cyber met all that criteria, particularly with the AI slant going on in the world of cyber today. So all of that, checked all the boxes. It was something different. I love to learn constantly, maybe to a fault. And I dove in, and it was tough. First 6 months, you feel like you know nothing. It's like, acronym soup in the world of cybersecurity. Sometimes you think that they're just making up acronyms to make it more confusing so that less people can get in. But after about 6 months, you become competent, and then every month after that, you're making your way over to become more and more competitive in the market.
And was there anything about the engineering teams that was different in the cyber world that you had to adapt to?
A lot, but I don't think it really had much to do with cyber, to be honest.
That was more SentinelOne then?
Yes. So there's I think when you have engineering dev centers, they all have their kind of cultural affinity. And part of that's company, and then part of it's region. And so when I joined SentinelOne, it was an all Israeli R&D team. And so, it's I think it's vexing when you're a team that's like the home team in Israel, and then you have an American CTO step into the limelight, and he's here to work with you and partner with you to go wherever we need to go as a company. So there's a lot of skepticism, a lot of difficult conversations that you had to go through to make that happen. But ultimately, it comes down to one thing: you have to be good at building trust, and trust is, it is the governing factor in terms of speed of a team actually executing. But that was probably the biggest thing coming in. It was less about working with a team that was originally focused on cyber.
Do you think there's anything different in terms of engineering teams in Israel versus other teams in other regions? I know you have a team in India. I'm certain you worked with teams in India at Oracle. You probably got teams in Eastern Europe. Is there anything different around the strategy of having a 2-region or a 3-region engineering team?
There's a lot of talent management that you have to do in terms of what's available in region. So to put this into perspective, if I want someone who has a broad perspective on scale, that's a very easy thing to actually hire in the US, for obvious reasons. We've had a lot of major companies develop here in the public purview and in the private market. When you go to a place like Israel, you find, brilliant people, very talented, but fewer people that have actually grown a business to any scale. A lot of them exit pretty early. So it's much harder to find people who have that understanding or the patience to want to do that, because it's so easy to take another small company, have it acquired, and then move on to the next thing. And that becomes kind of your cap in terms of the talent that you can actually access within the Israeli market. Now, it's not, let's just be clear, like that is a gross generalization. There are pockets there where you'll find that, but it does dominate the talent pool there and makes it a little bit difficult for you to find kind of those senior people in mass if you're trying to build a larger business. You'll find the same thing in other regions. So Czech Republic, you'll find a similarity there. India is actually quite a different beast these days. So you find a lot of people with a lot of experience that have touched, a lot of the global businesses out there. And so it kind of has a different slant and a lot of difficulties around the time zone in terms of to manage it, but obviously something that's integral to the tech world today in terms of being a major tech hub.
And Ric, we have a lot of VPs of engineering on the call today. Is there any advice you have for them on how do they manage having the sub team and making sure that the sub team doesn't feel like kind of a part 2 or an inferior group, particularly when you have 2 time zones or 2 regions?
Yeah. Rule number 1: never have a sub team. So I think that the biggest mistake you can make is actually saying that you have a low-cost region and designating them as the sub team. So when we stand up engineering centers, and this was true of Medallia as well, like they're full on. They have product management, UX. We try to get them in a position where they have some level of autonomy and aren't constantly reporting back to one entity to be able to do work. Often when you're developing that, you have to go kind of through a transitional period to achieve that goal, but that should be the goalpost. Makes it easier to hire. You have higher employee engagement. You have more autonomy, which brings more efficiency, and people aren't having to wait, for somebody to come online in another time zone. You'll never get completely away from that. You always have a little bit of, dependency management across those different zones, but that's what you're really trying to balance for.
And how do you ensure that? I mean, do you have a situation where there are engineering leaders who are managing teams in the US and they're based in Israel, or they're based in India, or they're based in Czech Republic? Or is the most senior engineering, team member always in the US?
Well, in this case, I am the most senior engineer.
You're right,
in
your subgroup products. Great point, Rick.
Yeah. So we attempt to make it such that if you're an Israeli leader, you're probably going to have some American talent. And the same would be true of our Czech leader, and the same would be true of our US leaders. So actually, as it is today, the leader of the Czech site, and I should also designate how we do this, is that we have a site lead from an engineering perspective. In this case, I'll pick on Martin in the Czech Republic. He does not own all engineering within the Czech Republic. He owns a portion of it, but he has responsibility for the care and maintenance of the site in addition to that. But he also actually has an American leader reporting to him with an American team. And so we have that kind of setup globally. That's a normal thing. And I think that in some industries that you'll find that that is an uncommon thing, but it's very common in cyber, particularly when you have a lot of Israeli origin companies, where you'll have Israeli leaders leading American origins of the company. But for us, we actually try to balance out that there is some version. People have global opportunities. You could run the entire, SentinelOne engineering team Israel, which went to
Hey, Rick, we may have lost you. Everyone, just give us a second. Let's make sure we get Rick back on. Hey, Rick, we lost you. We lost you for a bit.
So sorry. The going back to your question, yes, we do have a lot of situations where you can be in another geography outside of the US and manage globally across other regions. So at some point in time, maybe the engineering leader for SentinelOne will be based out of Israel or the Czech Republic. Who knows?
You've now led, I want to move things a little bit into leading high growth teams, and you've now led two very large high growth teams at both SentinelOne and Medallia. And what you've done differently from many others is you've also led those teams through a successful transition to a public company. So you were there pre-IPO, you went through the IPO process, and in the case of SentinelOne, you're certainly there today as it's a public company. How do you think engineering needs to adapt, both in terms of people and processes, to achieve a successful public company transition? What are the factors that are important?
Yeah, I think that a lot of engineering teams make the mistake early on that they don't need to be in the financials. And so what I mean by this is that, yes, we need to be driving the engineering organization off of quality metrics, productivity metrics, like we always do, user adoption metrics, etc. But you also have to really manage early on to be able to really be successful in the transition to a public company. Like, what is your percentage of spend, or what is R&D as a percentage of revenue? Like, you should know that. You should be tracking that regularly. You should understand what world-class is, and be able to understand that you've got a position to get to 15% within a given time frame. You should also understand COGS and understand your impact to gross margin and be able to really manage that well. Those become real clear focal points in your contribution to the company's income statement as you transition into the public market, and you're going to have to manage those across the board. The other factor in there is predictability of your engineering team. If you can't deliver on the dates that you commit to, well, there's a whole apparatus in terms of rhythm of the business that's connected to you, because your delivery predicates when marketing campaigns go out. That means that pipelines being generated, you're looking at pipeline conversion, and ultimately what that means to going from lead to opportunity and ultimately to deal closure. If you mess up on that delivery path, you're throwing off company financials and you become solely responsible for that. So you really have to make sure that you're predictable in delivery and that you're managing those core numbers in terms of R&D as percentage spend of revenue and managing COGS so that gross margins can rise to that glorious 80-85%.
And on the topic of scale, I also want to talk about hiring. And again, we have quite a few audience members who are hiring teams. And to give them context, you have taken SentinelOne's engineering team from about 200 people to over 1,000 engineers. Any tips for everyone on who's listening in on what's the process by how you think about hiring team members and scaling engineering orgs? And I'm assuming that you're not interviewing every single one of these hires now. So any tips for how your direct report should go and manage that process?
The first thing when you're young is definitely make sure that you hire good leaders. That'll translate to hiring good engineers, just in general. Seems nonsensical, but the reality of it is that I could throw everything out the door. If that fundamental is there, you're not going to hire good people. The next part is that you got to look at how do you get consistency. So you need to come up with your program that matches your culture, that has a clear interview panel where there's consistency in the questions being asked. Obviously, you've got to have some dynamicism so that people don't start gaming the interview process. But it puts the candidate through a battery of questions that ultimately allows you to really push different angles. Are they algorithmically sound? Do they understand design? Do they have a UX slant and understand product and product delivery? Do they understand what it means to actually build related to quality? Are they good partners for PM? So you want to have some PM engagement in those discussions as well as UX, even if they're a backend engineer. But that gives you kind of the full package and the consistency of the talent that you bring in the door. And you should never let a team hire on its own independently. Another team should also be part of that interview process, just so that you can kind of balance out the quality. Because you also don't want to hire for people to just stay in that one role. You want them to be talented enough or capable enough to have the latitude to move with the organization. Because ultimately, we're not just about building products, we're about building talent and their career paths as well.
And any advice on how hiring may change for engineering across regions? So is hiring and the interview process that you run here in the United States different from that in Czech or in India or in Israel?
I mean, the real differences for us is really more about remote versus in person. And we have a much more in-person culture in Tel Aviv and in Prague. And it's kind of the nature of how people want to work there. It's not like we dictated it. The offices there were actually asked for it. So there's a very hybrid working environment in place there with large facilities and whatnot. We don't have that in the US, and there's really not a strong draw from our talent to desire that.
Sorry, I got a question that came in from Dabo, who's a founder of one of our portfolio companies, DevZero. And he asked this question, is there a noticeable preference for certain stack components among engineering teams in different geos? For example, do engineers in the US tend to favor working on core platform and infra or enhancing the broader team's productivity, or is it quite ephemeral across regions?
There is actually a lot of variety. I'd say that looking at kind of like that holistic engineer that loves to produce and then also enable the team by going in and tweaking the build process and whatnot to make the whole team fly. I find that globally. It's not unique to the US. I might find it a little bit more in the US just because I think that there's probably broader exposure to the uplift that gives you. But I've had teams in Argentina and the Czech Republic have that same kind of behavior. I think that the tools that people use do become very regional. So, I mean, it's like I can throw a stone and hit a Python developer in Israel. It's just like, I don't know why, but that's kind of like the chosen language. And if it's not that, then it's Go, and it's very different in, say, the Czech Republic, where, the JVM based languages still dominate drastically. And it's quite a mix in the US in terms of language choices with regards to what people are building with. But attitudinally, in terms of how people develop, is actually vastly different. So you'll find, a variety of practices in the US. You'll see a very hyper agile, almost Kanban style of development out of Israel. Like they're flying, they want as little structure as possible so that they can just keep shipping code and pushing code. You'll find a whole lot more structure in the Czech Republic in terms of development processes, particularly with trying to lead with clear requirements up front before you actually commit to something and get it out the door. And I'd say you find a lot of variance in India just because of it being a massive population down there with a lot of different exposure to a lot of different sizes of companies.
And one more question from Liam. You talked about remote teams. Any tips for building trust with remote teams?
Yeah, go see them. That's the first thing. Nothing does better than breaking bread with somebody. And
is that just you going, or the engineering manager, or at SentinelOne, do you try to have the entire engineering team come together every quarter at a session?
We're too big to get together anymore as one team, unfortunately. But it does mean that making sure leaders are moving around and meeting the people that they're leading, as well as the people that they're not, just so there's familiarity and trust. And then it also means that the engineers themselves, it's like if you're leading an initiative, you should probably go see the people that are related to that if they aren't squarely in your region. And then beyond that, it comes down to being transparent and doing what you say, and being accountable. Those things, they translate over Zoom around the world. People value that. And if you give people the right indication and always deliver on that indication, that builds trust.
It's a great point. And I have a few of my companies that are not based in the Bay Area, and I always like to do in-person board sessions because I think it's the same point that you mentioned, Rick, that it just matters when the board ends up coming to the office. I think that it starts to build trust that investors actually care about the company. It's very, very hard to assess that if you're just doing Zoom calls. There's no context for individual employees on what's going on and what is the investor's point of view. And I think you're highlighting a very similar role with engineering and just within engineering as well.
Humanizes it.
Exactly. We've spoken mostly about engineering so far, but at the beginning of 2023, in addition to your CTO responsibilities at SentinelOne, you also took over the CPO responsibilities. I want to understand what motivated your decision to add product into your leadership, and how do you balance these priorities between product and engineering, which usually do conflict? And certainly if we look at Twitter or Instagram or any sort of forum, we'll see lots of memes and GIFs about why engineers aren't great or why product leaders aren't great.
Well, I mean, I've as an IC, I was both an engineer and a product manager. So I jumped between both of those, and ultimately drove a lot of my career around engineering just because there was so much volatility around owning an area of a product versus a portfolio of a product. And what I mean by that is that as a product manager, your career is predicated on the success of your product. You do have a lot of control over that, but you don't have absolute control over that. And in engineering, you have a lot more levers in terms of managing your direction. So for me, when I was betting my career, I leaned more engineering over time. Now, as you get further and further down the road, you can kind of neutralize the risks of product management to your own career trajectory by having engineering alongside of you. So that's one perspective of this. The other perspective of it is that even as an engineering leader, I've always been very product focused. And it's a blurry line between myself and the product leaders that I've partnered with, which is why I've been a good partner to them over time. In this particular case, I think that at SentinelOne, I think if you're good at solving problems and somebody sees that you're competent enough at that, they want to give you more problems. And so in this case, our CEO, Tomer, decided that it was a good idea that I take on this problem as well. It wasn't something that I was actively looking for, but I really enjoy it. I think it's really rounded out our team. It's brought more product focus to the engineering team. We have an amazing product team in place now that gels really well with the engineering team. And we've also developed the UX practice as well and started leading with user experience, which is something that we weren't doing earlier on when I had initially joined.
How do you manage that relationship as now a product leader with Tomer, the founder, the co-founder and CEO, who probably also has a product vision that he wants to push forward?
It's a great balance for us. I mean, I think that there's a lot of different relationships that can occur there, but for our personalities, it works. So he's definitely the visionary. I'm more the pragmatist, and so it works well that I listen, I understand where he wants to go, and then he's really willing to have some color on that, and then I bring the pragmatism in terms of how we can actually instantiate this thing versus it showing up tomorrow.
That's a great way to put it. Yogesh he asked this question. He said, any advice for folks who have a product engineering background, but they're trying to lean into the business aspects of the company? Is there anything they can do, whether it's reading a book or getting some type of training that isn't short of a very formalized MBA like the one you did at Wharton?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super easy. I'll tell you straight off that as much as I enjoyed my experience at Wharton, I thought for the first 5 years after that, it was probably a complete waste of my time. And it could have been better spent, elsewhere. My career might have even been further. But take a corporate financials class. Like you can actually find the exact one that I took on Coursera from Wharton. And it will tell you, the difference between an income statement and a balance sheet and all the dynamics around that. And that's like the baseline knowledge that you need to start understanding how metrics like COGS or R&D as percent of revenue have an impact on the financials of the business. And then you also need to get familiar with some basic, SaaS metrics like ARR, for instance, NRR. And those are things that you should have a grasp on. But outside of that, you don't need to. I mean, you can search the internet for half that stuff. You don't need to go get an MBA on it.
Any book you'd recommend?
And I would also say just pay attention to the earnings calls. Like there's nothing like listening to the earnings calls to really understand the importance of those metrics, particularly to your own business. I can't think of a book offhand that just like nails it. All of that was assembled for me either from that one course on Coursera or perusing the web, trying to understand the definitions of the key metrics and then trying to apply them.
I'll try to get that course out of you afterwards, and we'll send it around for everyone who joined.
Yeah, I'll give you a link. And I would say what's funny is that at Wharton there was not one class on SaaS financials, and I don't think there is to this day. And I was always perturbed by that.
Well, Rick, many years ago, I actually did get into Wharton and I got a full merit scholarship and I chose not to take it. So I'm super excited that you said all that. I'm going to take this recording, send it to my parents and just remind them that there was a good reason why I didn't. It was a good decision to not go to Wharton.
Smart man.
We have to talk about AI because basically everyone does. Today, every engineering and product leader is thinking about how they can embed AI across the existing product suite. And at SentinelOne, you helped to launch Purple AI, which is an AI security analyst. Could you share a little bit more about this new product and how you believe it augments the existing SentinelOne platform, as well as how it differentiates from some of the other tooling that's out there? There's Copilot for Security from Microsoft, CrowdStrike has launched Charlotte, and there are other players as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's brass tacks product development. So the first rule of product development is make sure that you calibrate your concept with the market, which is exactly what we did. So not this past RSA, but the RSA prior, we came to market with more of a concept of what Purple AI would be. And to bring everybody, to ground everybody on what the concept is, security analysts basically deal with tickets all day. They get alerts of things that look suspicious or potentially malicious. And it's coming through lots of different feeds and speeds. So it could be coming from an endpoint, firewall, et cetera. And then the analyst's responsibility is to go investigate the alert, which means that they're going to have to do a bunch of searches across the telemetry to understand and contextualize what the alert means, what the potential, indicator could lead to, and what other risks might be out there. And then they have to find some form of resolution. Do I apply block lists? Do I go and deploy agents? What have you? So when you look at that, there's a very clear pattern and a very clear value if you can make the analyst's life easier. So if I can provide summarization of those things, make it easier for them to run the searches on their behalf, or even automate the searches, or even automate the investigation thereafter so that they don't have to do the heavy lifting around that, well, they become more efficient, they close more tickets, and most of these security teams can't get to the bottom of the well in terms of these tickets. And then on top of that, from a CFO or a CISO level, who's the buyer, or the financier of the buyer, depending on the relationship there, there's value there in that they don't have to grow their workforce. So, it's good for everybody in that case. So we developed a concept around this 2 RSAs ago, put it out there. There was a lot of fanfare around it. People were really attracted to the idea. Shortly after that, there was a response from one of our competitors with their capability, trying to track that down. But the way to deliver a really good product is don't do it in isolation. So very early on, we started bringing in development partners, so potential customers who were attracted to the idea, help them calibrate it and develop it. I believe we had north of 60 by the time we were at the end of beta, and then ultimately launched the product once we had enough support from that cohort that was working on the product with us, that it was a good product. And so it went to market. It's been super successful. It's beat its targets across the board handily. And we get a lot of very positive feedback versus the competition that this is a functional, useful product versus something that is not.
And how do you think about embedding these AI products into the existing stack? And by that, I mean, I sit on several boards of more later stage companies where they have an existing platform like you do, and now they're trying to add in the AI capability. How did you think about when you added in Purple AI? Did you sell it as a different SKU? Did you embed it into the platform and just provide it additionally to all your 11,000 customers? What was the process by which you made that call?
So it is a different SKU for us, but if you're working within our platform, it looks like just an integrated product. And so, it doesn't change the UX drastically. What it does do is provides enrichment in the UX. So what I mean by that is you'll see a summarization of something generated by Purple AI in addition to the content that you might already have, making it easier for you to grok and understand what that content may be, whether it's threat research or a search result that you pulled to triage something. There are elements that we use as leaders, which are always present in the platform, that are Purple enabled and allow customers to kind of get a hint at what Purple could do for them. And that ultimately leads to an upsell.
Interesting. And so that is provided throughout the platform to say, hey, if you had Purple AI, we would have done this in this event or in this. Got it. Right. Have you seen anything around adoption? Have you seen that larger companies, for example, are more likely to adopt AI products, or smaller companies are more likely to adopt? Or has it been quite general in terms of who are the early adopters?
It's been general, but I think it depends on your industry. For us, we've been dominantly serving the mid-market and some enterprise, but then, really pushing and trying to grow in enterprise. Enterprise customers love it because, well, it makes their teams more efficient. They love that idea. But it also unlocks lower ends of the market where, security operations has not been something that a company can afford to do because they can't hire lots of people to do this. But, with something like Purple AI, you can get, two folks and a dog and run with Purple AI and have, pretty decent security operations up and running pretty quickly.
In addition to building Purple AI and and building AI into your own products, I'm sure you're also thinking about leveraging AI tools in existing engineering and product development processes. Could you share a little bit more about some of the startups or the existing tools that you're working with in this area?
Copilot's the dominant one that we work with. I'd say that the majority of the use cases that our engineers are currently using around that is like code translation or generation of unit tests or potentially integration tests. I think we're still pretty early in trying to figure out all the use cases where it's highly reliable and relevant to the work that we do. We are starting to look at how we can deal with triage. So, you've got your SRE cases and whatnot, trying to embed an LLM to help us in those cases. More broadly within the company, we've started integrating it with our support services and our diagnostic services. And then we're actually going through a whole process right now that we're leading through the IT team, where we're going through and looking at all the workflows in the company and figuring out how, one, we can digitize it, and then two, once digitized, what can you do to help either enhance and enrich it or fully automate it?
And anything on the startup front? Have you looked at any startup tools out in this area, or have you been pretty hesitant to do so? And why have you been hesitant if you have been?
We've been kicking the tires on a lot of different products, but there hasn't been anything that effective. And I'll say also, you get to a certain stage where you have to start looking at vendor risk. And what I mean by that is there has to be a certain girth to the vendors that you onboard into the company, because they in themselves either can, create a security risk for you because they're not well groomed in terms of their own vulnerabilities, or a stability risk. They don't have the ability to maintain operations, or could have not just discontinuity, but just end operations, unfortunately.
And speaking of startups, and this is not just specific to AI, but what's the best way for startups to reach out and partner with SentinelOne? Is there anything you'd recommend? Any process that you'd recommend that is specific to SentinelOne? And maybe also on the vendor risk part, any recommendations on how they should kind of still get you interested?
Well, it depends on the conduit by which they want to engage, right? So we have an investment arm, S1 Ventures. They don't lead to rounds, but they generally work with groups like Foundation Capital, for instance. So there's that avenue. So Rob on our team is a good person to reach out to on that side of it. In terms of us becoming a potential customer, it really depends on the product. So if it's more about an IT product that you've got, obviously you can reach out to me for that, and I can introduce you to Sandy, and she can run an evaluation with you guys. On the security side, I can introduce you to our deputy CISO, Josh, who's also on our team. On the engineering side, it's Stefan. He would be the person that would run the kind of evaluation. We do these all the time. We're always talking to potential technology providers, and I'd say like usually mid to late stage is who we talk to. Seed's kind of rough for us. On the engineering side, we do talk to a lot of early stage companies, just because there's, particularly when you're talking about like build tools and stuff like that, there are a lot of vectors where you can put in products without a lot of risk. But you can expect that the conversation will be not just about the evaluation of the functionality. We will have security involved. We will have procurement involved, just because it's the requirements of who we are as a public company.
And one question did come in from Yogesh, and you may not be able to fully answer this, but I'll ask it. Let's see. GenAI has garnered a lot of hype in the past year, and at times it feels like a hammer looking for a nail. How are you approaching your investments in GenAI? And by that, he means what problems are you focusing on? How do you meter your investments? And I assume this is through S1 Ventures. etc.?
We actually haven't done a lot of investing through S1 Ventures in AI. And I'd say it's largely in respect to what you're stating. So you kind of got like, it's like you've got NVIDIA, who's just like providing all of the capacity out there at this point. Obviously, some noteworthy others, but then you got kind of the infrastructure layer with OpenAI and Gemini and all of these other guys. Like you can't really invest in there; it's just too expensive at this point in time for an investment group like us. And then over top of that, you've got all the applications being developed, and this is where I think that the statement of like it seems like a problem looking for, or a hammer looking for a nail. It's true. I think there's a lot of use cases being exercised and people are still trying to find that fit, but we saw the same thing happen with, Bitcoin and Ethereum, and we've seen like the slow calibration to what it's useful and good for and where the value lies as a result of that. We'll see the same thing in AI. It's inevitable.
Two last questions before we end. One is around growth through M&A. And SentinelOne has done a little bit of M&A and added in different players. How do you think about a net new acquisition? What's the process by which you and the leadership team decide that, hey, we want to go and acquire a business in X category or in Y subsector because of some specific reason?
There are a lot of different reasons why you make that decision. So sometimes it's just a capability and you're just doing a cost benefit analysis. Like, is it cheaper for me to buy and integrate this thing, or is it cheaper for me to just build it? And you'll make that assessment based off the capabilities that you need, the capabilities that are in market. So if you only need a subset of capabilities that you find with a lot of the targets that are out there, then you might lead towards build if your timeline to market and your cost to do so match that. If you're looking at it more of at a corporate strategy level, then this is where you're going to look at, is there an ancillary business that's complementary to what you do as a business that has the right synergies with your go-to-market, that can extend the revenue of the company as a whole. And that's a different kind of buy as a whole. Generally, what we've been doing at SentinelOne has been more the former than the latter. And so in those cases, we entered cloud, we had a cloud runtime product, protection product, and we really wanted something that was more on the CSPM lean. So then we obviously acquired PingSafe to help round that out and help us compete with some of the others in market. But in terms of the corporate strategy, we haven't really delved into that yet, but we're starting to get to the maturity where we need to start looking at that more.
Last question. You've been super generous with your time. Oh, actually, before I ask that question, there's one more that came in. So let me try to add it because we do have some extra time. Is SaaS mostly an American phenomenon? And this from Christoph. And if so or not, why does it appear so from both a business and customer perspective?
That is a funny question, and it's actually a very fair question. It is definitely a global phenomenon. I think the adoption rates have varied across regions. So obviously, SaaS is permeated North America, and it's hard to find somebody who wants to procure on-prem. They just think about I'm going to buy some SaaS. Now, I think data privacy and sovereignty issues have come into play in other regions. So when you go to something like Europe, there are a lot of concerns within the EU and within independent countries within the EU about those two issues. And as a result of that, there is hesitancy in some cases around going to SaaS. Now, they often do. There are lots of cases out there where they do. So SentinelOne's a case where they definitely pick up our product within all of those regions, but it's not without a lot of scrutiny. So And I would also argue that in those regions, there's still the residue of a lot of on-premise software and comfort around having that on-premise software. So my hunch, and this is just pure speculation, is that we will see more SaaS vendors provide portability, where that portability allows you to deploy in somebody else's AWS account or GCP account and not just work within your unified multi-tenant SaaS environment. And it'll go one step further, where it's also portable and runnable in private data centers. And the reason I say this is that a lot of those data privacy and sovereignty issues are becoming more and more strongly worded in this environment. And there's definitely a lot of investment going into private data centers as a result of the AI movement, because there's a lot of fear about doing that processing specifically on company-related data on the public cloud or with publicly available models. So I think we'll see more appetite to pull in or curiosity to pull in. We'll see which way it actually goes in the long run, but there'll definitely be a whole lot more conversations around that coming up.
I think the other thing that's even more interesting is that with the new chips that are coming into even PCs, there's this whole focus around it, what's called an AI PC, and the ability to run these large language models at your edge. And part of the value of that is that it actually reduces the risk from a privacy and cybersecurity perspective, because now you don't have to rely on the cloud. So I think that's going to only create more complexity to this existing experience with SaaS.
I completely agree. Completely agree.
Last question. If you were to leave your job and choose to become a founder, which areas within cyber, engineering, or product, because you've spent time in all three of these subsegments, would you focus on?
Now I'm going to make a statement, and it's not it may be a terrible idea. So just like don't run out and try to implement this, because it may end up being the worst idea ever. But I think that there is a clear market for actually nailing end user entity and behavior analytics. And it's particularly true with everything that's going on in AI today, because data exfiltration kind of has a different slant and is growingly different as a result of this. So one, I think it's intellectually fascinating, and that's probably more my curiosity than the commercial outcome that you might get from it. But there's definitely going to be a need there that is not met.
Very interesting. It's always good when there are good answers that are different. It just adds to the flavor. And on the positive side, if you do end up doing that and you're on the call, then maybe you should chat with Ric on the topic. Well, thank you so much, Ric, for making time today on this Friday afternoon. And thanks, everyone, for joining us. And Ric, we hope that you continue to scale out SentinelOne. And we're selfish in that we are also customers of SentinelOne. So we're excited to see new features and capabilities that you push out.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for all the great questions. Hopefully I've been helpful and useful to you guys. Reach out if there's anything I can do for you.
Thanks so much, Ric.
Thank you. Take care.